It's been 6 months since I moved out of San Francisco. Back in May, I gave up my apartment in San Francisco, and in this video, I just wanted to give you guys an update for how it's been going and kind of share some learnings that I've had since I decided to leave the city that I've spent the last 4 years of my life in. Hi everyone! If you're new here, welcome. My name is Luba, and I'm a former product manager and a software engineer in Silicon Valley, and on this channel, I talk about tech entrepreneurship and my journey to a balanced and productive life. A couple of months ago, I posted a video about me leaving San Francisco and the reasons why I've decided to move away from San Francisco after spending amazing 4 years of my life, actually technically 5 years of my life since I've come to San Francisco as an intern a few times. But basically, I've kind of jotted down the reasons for why I've decided to move on, and that video definitely was kind of controversial because on the video I've received a ton of, very begrudging comments about the tech employees just ruining the city, wishing me just like to never come back to the city, being extremely triggered, political. I hope this video is not gonna trigger you to any particular negative feelings. That's definitely not my intention. Just wanted to call that out up front. It's been about 6 months since I've decided to move, and since then I've lived in the suburbs in the Bay Area, I've lived in Santa Cruz, I've lived in LA for a few weeks, I've lived in Mexico for about a month and a half, I've spent the last month in Nashville where I am right now, and I'm about to move to Los Angeles for at least a month, and then we'll see. I have some plans to explore Austin, but it's kind of, we'll see. The world is my oyster, as they say. And this is actually one of my first learnings that I've had since moving away from the city. I'm curious, what is your guys' ideal location? Do you have a dream city or a dream place to live in? I'd love to hear from you. Leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. I love reading your guys' comments, and I try to respond as much as I can. I've kind of realized how great it is to not constrain yourself by this notion of a lease. If I was still in San Francisco, and because of the pandemic, one, I decided to leave my job, but even if I was still at a job, there was no office to go to. Everything is remote. And I could imagine that I would have wanted to maybe go somewhere else to kind of explore Tahoe or Los Angeles, or just like kind of get a glimpse of what it's like to live in a different city. And if I was still in a lease, that would just be really, really hard to do, because then you have to pay for your lease, and then you have to pay for a new accommodation wherever you want to go, and it's just super inconvenient. So one of the first learnings that I've had throughout the 6 months, considering how much I've happened to move around in this past time, is that damn, like, not having a lease is kind of great on one hand, but kind of not so great on another hand, because I don't technically have a permanent spot that I can call home. I still consider Bay Area to be my home base because that's where my boyfriend is from, but I don't really have like my own permanent location there. And after these 6 months of nomadic lifestyle, despite it being super fun, despite me seeing so many different places, I've kind of been craving to have like a more consistent spot, which I'm hoping to get in 2021. But it's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's great to not lock yourself in a lease if you want to explore a bunch of locales, but on the other hand, I don't think nomadic lifestyle is for me, which brings me to my second learning, which is that nomadic lifestyle is exciting, but it's kind of challenging. In the last couple of months, I've traveled around a bunch, and every single time I had to develop the routine, develop my kind of sense of normality of where I'm trying to go, what am I trying to achieve, and I've discovered a completely new appreciation for people who decide to live nomadically. Actually, when I was in Mexico, I was a part of this really cool community called Launch House, and that's where I'm going in January in Los Angeles. One of the guys in the house was a digital nomad, which meant that for the past, I think, at least 6 years, he'd always kind of lived out of his suitcase. He traveled around. He didn't have like a consistent permanent home base for more than a couple of months at a time. And I really admire that. After trying that out myself, I've just realized how, hard it is to always go to a coffee shop, try to focus, kind of be okay with things around you changing all the times. Maybe your friends are not necessarily permanent because you meet other nomads and then they decide to leave, or you leave, even if you develop friendships with people from the local community. It's like really exciting, but also pretty challenging for me personally. So that was a really interesting learning, the fact that digital nomad lifestyle is cool, but I don't want to live that lifestyle for an extended period of time. I'd love to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the easiest way to build a website. I've recently made a video about no-code tools, and Squarespace kind of fits into the category of no-code website builders. Squarespace is a design-driven tool, which means that you do not have to be a designer to use Squarespace to create a beautiful website for yourself or for your business. They have a ton of different plugins such as mail delivery, e-commerce. You're able to see analytics from your website through Squarespace, and you're even able to buy your domain through Squarespace. No matter what you do in Squarespace and no matter how you use it, you can be assured that your website will look beautiful and extremely professional. If you'd like to check out Squarespace and receive 10% off, go to squarespace.com/lifeofluba. I'm also gonna duplicate this link in the description down below, so consider checking out our sponsor. Another learning that I've had is things outside of San Francisco and Bay Area are not as cheap as I thought they would be. And caveat here is that I'm talking about things in the US. When I was in Mexico, for sure, lifestyle there, rent, food, everything was significantly cheaper. But from my experience being in the US, and granted, I've traveled to California, which in and of itself is pretty expensive, but now I'm in Nashville, I'm realizing that this notion of like San Francisco is super expensive, it's true, but at the same time, it's not like everywhere else in the US is just dirt cheap. I do want to mention that I'm renting this specific place out on Airbnb, so that means that there is a premium. Of course, accommodations long-term are definitely cheaper than San Francisco, but things like food and groceries, something that I had expected to be like half the price, is definitely not half the price. I would say it's about the same price. So that was kind of a surprising finding for me. I guess I just maybe haven't lived enough in a lot of different places in the US. Another positive learning that I've had is that it's really refreshing to meet people outside of tech. Bay Area and San Francisco is kind of its own bubble. People always say that the Bay Area, Silicon Valley is very monocultured because everyone is more or less doing the same thing. Everyone is more or less of the same age. People have very similar hobbies, very kind of similar backgrounds, and you're always meeting a person that you've probably met before. But outside of the Bay Area, things are very different. Even if you meet someone, I don't know, on Zoom or like at a store, people don't ask you right off the get-go, what do you do? What company do you work for? Oh, like what is the startup that you want to build? Give me a pitch. Oh, I've met this specific VC. He or she is so cool. Like the conversations are very, very different, and that is quite refreshing. At some point, I've wanted to move to New York, or I was curious to live in New York for a few months, and I probably will do it at some point. But one of the reasons why that was appealing to me is because you always meet so many different people. They're doing a variety of different professions. They have super versatile interests. The conversations and social interactions are not constantly the same. They're not revolving around work all the time. So yeah, that has been a very refreshing learning. And I guess kind of on the same point about people not being in tech, people don't talk about work all the time. For instance, when I was in Mexico, again, limited exposure to the local community or to people in other communities, but I've noticed that people just have very different values, super different priorities. They don't necessarily make work be their life. And I'm not saying that, I don't want work to be my life. My goal is to do something that I really enjoy, and that's kind of what I'm doing right now. That's the reason why I decided to also leave my job to run my own company. But there should be like some sort of a balance where you love your work, but you also have some hobbies outside of work. You also have kind of like a life outside of exactly what you do. So I think that's pretty interesting to expose yourself to a variety of attitudes and values so that you can also frame your own perspective and understand what kind of lifestyle do you want to have and what kind of priorities do you want to have. So in the last 6 months, I've lived in the suburbs quite a bit, and that is a big change from my life from over the past 4 years because, I lived in trendy neighborhoods in the city. I was always living in apartments. Actually, I lived in a house once for my first year in San Francisco. But nonetheless, I've always been kind of an urban person, surrounded by restaurants, surrounded by hustle and bustle of the city. Whereas in the last 6 months, I've kind of, one, I've been in houses. Two, I've like mostly stayed in suburbs. And I've realized that suburban life is quite nice. I really rediscovered my passion for staying in indoors, and as long as I have internet and a computer and or maybe a book to read, I can occupy myself enough, and I don't really need to have like a lot of external activity, external stuff happening and going on. It's like quite a nice balance of things that I personally enjoy. So that was a complete new discovery for me, because I would never have in the world imagined that I would not be bored living in suburbs. And on that point about living in the suburbs, I've also realized that living close to nature is also really nice, because taking walks in nature, taking short hikes, something that I was super not into while I was living in San Francisco. I feel like I almost had a block in my mind around not liking hiking. And I think the reason for that is because back in the day, like 6 or 7 years ago, I was dating someone who was super outdoorsy, and I feel like every hike we've gone on was super uphill, and like uphill hiking is not something that I enjoy doing all the time. And it was like always about being competitive and it being tough, and wasn't really just like a pleasant walk in nature. And I think I've distilled this thought in my mind that I just dislike hiking, and hiking is always a strenuous activity, and that kind of kept me away from just enjoying any sorts of hiking. But because I've stayed in the suburbs close to nature during these last 6 months, or a few times during these last 6 months, I think I've gained another appreciation for nature and for just like small naturey walks. And I've rediscovered that, hey, hiking is not always about walking uphill, about it being like a super strenuous activity. So I'm thankful for kind of getting rid of this limiting belief in my own mind. And having lived in San Francisco for so long, I've gotten extremely used to the variety of international cuisine that is available in the city. I guess I had a hunch that somewhere else in the US it's probably not as international, or people don't put such a huge emphasis on food and going out to restaurants and just like having a taste for a bunch of versatile food. So I've realized just how blessed people in San Francisco are for the optionality of different foods that is available in the city. San Francisco is super high up in the restaurants that it offers. People always rave about San Francisco cuisine, but in my mind, whenever you go to New York, I've kind of almost always had a better experience in New York restaurants. So that made me question the rating San Francisco got when it came to cuisine and food. If you didn't do the best you could, you would probably not be on the market anymore, because it's so competitive in the restaurant scene. And on this point of how great San Francisco is when it comes to restaurants, I would love to urge you to support your local restaurants, because so many restaurants in San Francisco and all over the country have suffered immensely from the virus, from the pandemic. It's been just really hurtful to see how many places have shut down because of mandatory lockdown. Small business owners, restaurant owners literally not having a choice to open up and to make money. So if you have a favorite restaurant in your neighborhood or in your city, consider getting takeout from them, ordering delivery from them, because it really supports any type of small business around you, because they're the ones that are hurting the most right now. So on this point, San Francisco is super international, and somewhere outside of the city, there is definitely not as much of abundance of choices and abundance of restaurants and cuisine. So that is just something that I've realized having lived in a bunch of places and traveled in the last 6 months. Which brings me to my last point, my last learning from moving out of San Francisco, which is home cooking. In the last 6 months, I've definitely cooked a lot more than I've done probably over the last like 10 years, because even in college, I didn't cook all that much. I've probably just gotten a bunch of simple foods and a bunch of cafeteria food. But since we've been in a lockdown, and since I've literally been staying at home outside of my trip to Mexico, I've kind of rediscovered, one, how easy it could be to cook at home. I shouldn't really say that I've personally been cooking a ton, but my boyfriend has been cooking a ton at home, because he is a marginally much better cook than I am. But I've been sous chefing, and it's actually been really nice to eat home cooked meals, to know what exactly goes into your food, to go grocery shopping more often, something that I actually really enjoy. I love going to grocery stores anywhere I travel, because I think that kind of shows you the culture more, it shows you the people and how they like to live a little more, kind of that glimpse into the local culture and attitude. I've definitely been trying to get more into cooking myself over this past time, and it's been really refreshing, because I think being able to whip out simple recipes and meals is a really great skill, and something that I want to invest more time into going forward. These are some of my learnings from living in a bunch of different places over the last 6 months. As as I've mentioned, I'm going to Los Angeles in January, and I'm thinking of checking out Austin afterwards. And I've also had a goal for this year to spend a month or two in Eastern Europe, either in Belarus, my home country, or Russia, or maybe Ukraine, or ideally visit all of those three together. That's where my family is still. And now that I'm my own boss, I run my own companies, and I kind of don't have to be in a specific locale to do that. I think this is the perfect time for me to spend more time with my parents, and who knows when else I'll have a choice to do that. So I definitely want to take advantage of that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, and consider subscribing to this channel for more content about tech entrepreneurship and balanced and productive life. And bye for now.